Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been 9 years since Hurricane Sandy devastated New Jersey, New York, and the Northeast. And despite some members' efforts to block disaster relief for our region, we succeeded in securing billions of dollars of CDBG DR funding. 9 years later, HUD is attempting to claw back from New Jerseyans the money they used to repair their homes and get back on their feet. And the reason some New Jerseyans are facing these clawbacks is because CDBG grant money is considered to have duplicated a benefit with SBA loan money. Of course, loan money you have to pay back, grant money you don't. So, Mr. Sprayberry, can you explain why it was important that the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018 ended the policy of SBA loans duplicating CDBG-DR?
Well, CDBG-DR is targeted for low to moderate income population. And so if they qualify for CDBG-DR, it's unclear to me why you would want to claw back the funding from an SBA loan. I know that that clawback is not consistent with, I think it's Section 1210 of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018, which caused HUD to revise their DOD policies and allowed them from the 1st of 2016 to the end of this month. You don't have to pay back your SBA loans, the ones that you declined or only received a part of. But I understand that doesn't cover you, sir, in New Jersey.
Well, I just wanted the principle. I mean, an SBA loan you have to pay back, and that's fine. A CDBG DR, you get a grant, and so first of all, with I think horrible messaging to the potential victims in terms of what they could and could not do. So I appreciated that Congress prevented this issue for survivors from 2016 on. I hope my colleagues will work together with me to pass relief that the House of Representatives passed earlier this year in its appropriation bill so that these Sandy victims can close this dark chapter of their lives. I hear from some colleagues that CDBG-DR spending should be curbed, that the recovery process should be left to the states. You would be hard-pressed to find a place in the country that is not impacted by these natural disasters, whether it be flooding in my state, wildfires in the West, chronic droughts across the heartland. Every single state inevitably needs assistance. And it would be incredibly difficult for a state to meet those challenges. Look at what's happening now in Kentucky and other states. We know that for every dollar invested in mitigation, the federal government saves $6 in disaster relief spending. Mr. Martin, shouldn't Congress direct some CDBG-DR funds towards mitigation of risk so that we can protect our communities, reduce the fiscal damage to our local economies, and ultimately prevent more federal spending in the future?
That mitigation activities, I would agree with, should certainly be allowed. And the reality is that so many of the activities that occur in the long-term recovery, particularly for housing and community infrastructure, are also mitigation-related activities because they come in much longer in the sequence of events. Designating specific quantities of recovery versus mitigation per jurisdiction is going to be a little complicated because it's the nature of the hazard occurrence and the hazard frequency and hazard type that will vary in each place on the kind of mitigation activity. So the cost differentials between the two will be a little more complicated. But I would certainly think that mitigation activities should be encouraged in many of these jurisdictions as they rebuild in the long term.
Thank you. Finally, according to a HUD Inspector General report, the Trump administration intentionally stalled roughly $20 billion of CDBG-DR funds for Puerto Rico's recovery from Hurricane Maria, a storm that killed more than 3,000 people and more by some estimates. To make matters worse, the previous administration tried to obstruct the IG's investigation into the unprecedented stonewalling of congressionally appropriated disaster aid to Puerto Rico. I'm pleased to see that President Biden has freed the funding to the island, but the many harms of a delayed recovery linger. The island still faces a beleaguered power grid. Some families still have FEMA blue tops over their homes, which were supposed to be only temporary. Mr. Martin, shouldn't the CDBG-DR grant-making and rule-making process be standardized so that future administrations cannot arbitrarily block disaster aid for political or other reasons?
Certainly, and the holding back of money was after the allocation had already been made. And our study had shown that in the previous 10 years prior to that ended in 2015, 2005 to 2015 disaster CDBG-DR grant making, that the HUD has actually expedited that, have reduced the time from appropriation through allocation and delivery of first funds. So I think in many ways that was an anomaly, and one would assume that left to HUD to own a purview that would continuously be standardized and shrunk, and certainly with permanent authorization that would allow even clearer transparency.
Yeah, it was a nefarious anomaly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.